You are listening to episode number 296 of Better Blood Sugars with Delane MD. Hey there, welcome to the podcast. I am so glad you're taking some time for you, and I feel really privileged that you're going to spend it with me today or for these next few minutes. Today, we are going to talk about periods. This was a question that was sent in to me by a listener named Emily. This is a couple weeks ago. I had to search hell and high water to find the message, but I finally found it. It was in an inbox on one of my Instagram pages that was strangely located, but whatever, I found it, and I'm so glad that I'm going to get the opportunity to talk about that today, and answer this question. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. This is a podcast for women who have type 2 diabetes, so it kind of makes sense that we're going to talk about periods and insulin resistance and diabetes. So the question read, Hi, I'm really enjoying the podcast. I just wanted to know if you've ever covered menstrual cycle and its effects on blood sugars. I've been wondering if it's normal for fasting levels to be higher during different phases. And then she went on further to ask, it would also be interesting to hear about cycle syncing, meaning is it important to change the sort of exercises you are doing based on the phases of your cycle in order to avoid too much stress? I've heard people talk about it a lot, but usually they don't struggle with blood sugar worries. So I thought, yes, this is clearly a great podcast to dive into. Um, I do want to recommend right now, as I think about it, there is a book that I am struggling to remember the name of. It's Hormone Intelligence, I think, by a woman named Aviva Rom, Romm. M is in Michael, M is in Michael, Romm. And it's Hormone Intelligence. And she dives a lot into, kind of what how you should cycle life in sync with your menstrual cycle. So if that's something you're interested in, Emily, or if any other listeners interested in that, please go find that book, listen to it. It's long. I don't believe I listened to the entire book. I listened to a lot of it. Um, it talked about all different aspects of life, not just insulin resistance, diabetes, those sorts of things. For me, particularly, and I'm going to talk about this in just a minute about how I don't have a cycle and why I don't have a cycle. So it wasn't horribly applicable to me, and that's why I think that I couldn't stick with that book. It's a pretty long book, but really, really lots of really great information. She is a obstetrician gynecologist, so I think that she's a great source of information. So I highly recommend that book. Check it out if you're interested in more information about periods and cycling and syncing your cycle with your lifestyle. Before we get started into this topic, I want to give you the warning that I give in every podcast. If you are on medications for your type 2 diabetes, please be careful making dietary changes and exercise changes that I talk about in this podcast. You have been medicated for the way you lived your life in the past, the way you ate food, and the way you moved your body in the past. If you change those things, you're going to need to change your medications. If you don't change your medications, you can end up very sick, the kind of sick that looks like hospitalizations, ER visits, and possibly even death. And that's not why you're making these changes. So I need you to get a very clear line of communication open with your primary care or the provider who wrote for these prescriptions for you, and figure out how they want you to share your blood sugars with them and how they will share medication changes with you. If you don't do this, you can end up quite sick. So I want to encourage you to do that. If you're not sure what you need to be eating to see these better blood sugars, I have help for you. I have a 14-day guide. It's called 14 Days to Better Blood Sugars. You can find it at delanemd.com/better. That's BETTER. This is 14 days of menus, breakfast, lunch, and dinner that have foods put together for you. You just have to go buy them and you have to have them available to you in order for you to start seeing better blood sugars. It's very powerful. Again, if you haven't made that phone call about your meds, please do so. I don't want you to get sick, but this is a very powerful program. If you have done the program and you did not see better blood sugars, please set up a better blood sugars assessment call. I have not heard any woman come to one of these calls and say, hey, I did the 14 days and I didn't see any difference. Most of the time, you're going to see significant differences in your blood sugars. So if you haven't seen the difference, set up the call. If you have seen the differences, but you're having a hard time figuring out how to apply those 14 days and that style of eating to the rest of your life, set up a better blood sugars assessment call. During this call, it's a 45-minute call. You and I hop on a Zoom meeting and we look at what you've been doing, at how you live your life, at how you want to live your life, and then how to go forward living your life in a way that keeps you healthy. You can find a link to my calendar at calendly.com/DelaneMD/call. So Calendly is CALENDLY.com/DelaneMD/call. Calendly.com/DelaneMD/call. You can get in my calendar there. We'll set up a call and you and I will hop on and we'll get you started towards living your naturally healthy life without meds, without diabetes, and putting that all behind you. So let's talk about periods, insulin resistance, and blood sugar. I have found for myself, I think I've avoided this topic because I experience a little bit of guilt about this whole period business. I don't have periods. Um, and so I don't deal with changes in my blood sugars. And it's not because I've been hysterectomized, although some women have, of course, and some women still have ovaries left in, even though they've had a hysterectomy. And so they still can have um, hormonal fluxes. For me, I have an IUD in. I don't want to disclose TMI here. But my last C-section with my 17-year-old twins never healed correctly. So my uterus always has this defect in it, which just means that my periods last a really long time. They last like 20 some odd days. And then of course you start your next period. So I would only go a couple days a month without any bleeding. And I spoke with my doctor and we talked about possibly putting going back to surgery and trying to remedy the defect in my uterus, or the other option was to put an IUD in and shut down my periods. And I didn't, the literature, because it's kind of rare finding, literature out there about this did not show significant improvement with the surgery. And so I didn't want to go under the knife and go under anesthesia and do all these things without being guaranteed that there was going to be some improvement. Nor did I want to take the time down. So the option I chose was to have an IUD placed. So I will tell you, and if you listen to the Aviva Ram book or read it, like people read anymore. If you go through that Aviva Ram book, Hormone Intelligence, she very much speaks out against the health, like the negative health impacts of having no period. So being on the pill or being on an IUD that shuts your periods down are really not great. So I will tell you again, I bring some guilt associated with this because I don't have periods. But I will offer that we all have to make these decisions, right? Like there's two choices, and if it was clearly one choice was the right choice, there wouldn't be any, question about it. You would just do the thing. But when there's two choices and they both have pros and cons. They both have benefits. They have downfalls to them. This is the shit sandwich conversation that I have with clients on a regular basis. We all have to choke down a shit sandwich. We just get to decide which flavor it is, meaning that there's always going to be a negative aspect to all of the decisions that we make. We just need to decide which negative aspects we're willing to take. So when it comes to your food, I want to use this as an opportunity for an example of this because I think it's very easy to get stuck in the idea that I'm going to make a decision and I'm going to love every aspect about it. And it's always going to be a good decision. And I'm going to avoid a decision that I'm going to hate all the things about. And it's always going to be a bad decision. And that's just not the case. You have two decisions and both have good and bad qualities to it. And you just get to make a decision and then like the reason you did it, right? When you eat food that's bad for you, You have good and bad associated with that, right? You eat a Twinkie, it tastes amazing. You don't have to sit there and feel desire for the craving or desire for the Twinkie without eating it because you ate it. That's amazing. You get to hang out with your friends and enjoy a Twinkie or whatever the food is. That's amazing, right? If it's that overeating component and we just like to overconsume, maybe it's pecans, but you're overconsuming it, you don't have to sit there and want more without getting more. And that's amazing. When it comes to these food decisions that we make that we don't love, there is something good, but then there's something bad about it too. If you eat Twinkies, you have all those good things and high blood sugars. If you overeat pecans, you have all of that good stuff and higher blood sugars possibly, and weight gain and feeling overfull, right? There's always a good and a bad component to it. Now, if you don't eat the Twinkies, if you don't eat the pecans, you're front loading the bad part, right? Like you have to sit there and not feel or not eat the food that you want to eat. You have to sit there and feel all the feelings that you're going to have and not eat it. And then afterwards, you have better blood sugars. Your weight goes down. You have all of the positive effects that you're wanting. Okay. There is always a shit sandwich to every decision that we make. You just have to decide which flavor. For me, with my periods, I don't love not having a cycle. I would really like to have a cycle. I think that it's just more in tune with our body. You know, the hippy dippy in me wants that. That being said, there's a negative aspect. For the last 17 years, I would have had 20 some odd day periods every month. And that was just not something I was willing to do. So I took the negative aspect that comes with the IUD and I don't have periods. And that's the good and the bad. Okay. So there is some guilt that I've had about this topic, and I think that that's part of the reason that I've kind of avoided it over the years of this podcast. But then as I was looking through it, I also realized that there's a lot of information there. There is a lot. I mean, like as I was looking through the literature, I was like, wow, this is huge amount of information out there. And I really wanted to narrow it down. So I looked at a lot of studies for how estrogen and progesterone affect blood sugars and insulin resistance. And then I also found studies that talk about how irregular periods early on in life, like in your early adulthood years, are associated with the future development of diabetes later in life. And there's just a whole ton of stuff. And then, of course, there's the information out there about how hormones impact our food cravings and choices and our mood and our energy level. So this is really, truly a very deep topic. And I'm going to do my best to keep my answer to this question from, significant scope creep. So we're going to talk about what the menstrual cycle is, like what happens. I had to refresh on it. And maybe you're an old pro and you know exactly what happens. That's great. But just in case you don't, I want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. What happens hormonally during that 28-day cycle. And then I'm going to talk about what happens to our blood sugar based on those hormones. And then I want to talk about strategies for like planning and managing it. How are you going to most effectively intentionally manage those parts, those cycles in your life? So a typical menstrual cycle, prototypical, is 28 days, right? So that's just the prototype. Some people go longer, some people shorter. A normal cycle is anything between 21 days and 35 days. What happens during that cycle is that you shed your uterine lining, and that's where we bleed. That's our period. And then you grow and develop another egg. You release that egg, and then you rebuild that uterine lining before you start the next cycle, which is the beginning of your period. So, yes, the beginning of your cycle is actually day one of your period. I think that many women look at that as the end of the cycle, but it's when we're looking at these hormones, when we're looking at the literature, that's what everybody defines as day one. And the reason that that is because it's very easy to define a yes, no, a before and after. When you start bleeding, that is the first day of your period. So there are these four parts the bleeding, the egg development, the egg release, the uterine lining buildup, and they all occur in 21 to 35 days. On average, they occur in 28 days. So we are going to talk about a 28-day cycle. If your cycles are consistently 32 days, there may be some changes to the days. Like I'm going to talk about day 1 to 6 and 7 to 12 and 13 to 15. That number may be a little different. You can pay attention to your body and when you're ovulating and assume that that's mid-cycle, and then kind of set your dates, what day you are based on that and when you have your period and when you bleed. If you are irregular, because remember, polycystic ovarian syndrome is the #1 cause of menstrual irregularities in this country, and it's insulin resistance and prediabetes. If you're irregular, it does make it hard to kind of know these things, okay? You can still kind of have some rough estimates based on a lot of different things, but certainly paying attention to your body is going to be key to this. So menstrual phase is the first phase, and that's day 1 through 6. If you can hear my cat meowing, I'm so sorry. I don't know how she got in this room other than the door wasn't entirely shut, and now she's here. So I apologize for my cat. So the menstrual phase is usually day 1 through 6, and it's the days of our period. It's the days that we bleed. Many times women look again, this is the end of our period, but again, in science, we consider this day 1 of our cycle, of our 28-day cycle. So day 1 to 6 is the start of your cycle, and it's the menstrual phase. And then you move in after day 6, around day 6, you move into the proliferation phase. Some of these terms, so proliferation phase is talking at least about what happens in the uterus. So the proliferation, that term proliferation is talking about what is happening in your uterus. That is the same as your follicular phase, which is talking about what happens in your ovaries, okay? So after your menstrual phase, you move into this next phase, this proliferation phase or this follicular phase. They're the same thing. They're day 7 through 12. And in your uterus, your body is not doing so much in the uterus, but that follicular phase in your ovary this is when your egg, the ova, is starting to develop and grow. So this occurs in a cyst. So do understand that all ovaries develop a cyst every single month. This is a normal part of our cycle. But in that 7 to 12 days, you're developing a cyst. You move into the ovulation phase when the cyst ruptures. Okay. So that ovulation phase is day 13 through 15, and the egg is released into the fallopian tubes. And then after that 13 through 15, you move into the secretory or luteal phase. So again, secretory is what's happening in the uterus. And then the luteal is what's happening in the ovary. There's the corpus luteum, I think, is the structure. The follicle ruptures, that cyst that develops the egg, it ruptures and it turns into the corpus luteum. And that's where that name luteal comes from. That structure secretes hormones. And so that's why this phase is named that. So the secretory phase, because of what's happening in the uterus, but that's is also the same as the luteal phase. This is day 16 through 28. So during this phase, your uterine lining is starting to grow and develop with the intention of accepting a fertilized egg and growing a human life inside of it, housing and growing a human fetus, okay? So this involves a lot of blood. This involves a lot of things. This is why our periods are bleeding, okay? That's why it happens. So if an egg is fertilized, it goes through a series of changes that start to release hormones to keep your progesterone high and your uterine lining built, and it won't slough off and you don't have a period, and that's called being pregnant. We don't do that a lot in life. Human beings don't do this every month for, 30, 40 years. What we do most months is we have a period, okay? So when our progesterone drops, we start the next cycle. We have a period, the menstrual phase. We slough that all off and we go through these 28 phases or 28-day phases again. So talking about progesterone being high brings us to the hormone action and during these phases and how they lead to the experiences we have and really the answer to Emily's question. So during the menstrual phase of our cycle, day 1 through 6, our periods, this is our period. These are associated with low hormones. Overall, all the hormones are kind of low in this phase, in these 6 days. So the impact of the two primary players, the estrogen and the progesterone in these days should be very low. Okay. So understand that, these days 1 through 6 of our period are actually pretty stable hormonally. On day 7 through 12, our estrogen starts to climb. So again, this is our follicular phase. This is that proliferation phase in the uterus, follicular phase in the ovary. During these days, your estrogen is higher. Your blood sugars will tend to be better. You're going to tend to have lower blood sugars. You're going to tend to see better control over your blood sugars. Which means in the days prior to ovulation, it's going to seem like it's easier to keep better blood sugars. So if you're having what we call ass grabs, where you have little sneaks, little cheat eats, and you're like, sometimes it's not a deal, but other times it's crazy. Well, it may be that these sometimes when it's not a deal is in this phase of your period, you just tend to see better blood sugars. So on day 12 through 15, ovulation occurs. And your hormones, it's a shit show in there. It's everything. All man for themselves, right? Like it's like your estrogen peaks, your progesterone spikes, your progesterone starts to climb. Your estrogen peaks, though. You also have a surge of a hormone called luteinizing hormone from your brain, and another surge of a hormone called follicular stimulating hormone from your brain. So there's like the hormones are kind of wild on those few days. So, and all of this in preparation to release the egg. That's really what this is doing. Okay. So after this, after your egg releases, the LH and the FSH come down and the estrogen starts to drop. But now you move into the last phase before you start your next period again, day 16 through day 28. This is primarily a time where our body is affected by progesterone. This is progesterone dominant time. So there is a rise in progesterone during this time. On day 16, it starts to climb and it peaks around day 21 and 22, and then it starts to drop to nothing. Okay, it comes down to nothing. That is the luteal phase of our ovaries. And then, of course, the secretory phase of our uterus. The effect of the high progesterone on our blood sugars is that it really leads to worsening blood sugars, worse blood sugar control. In general, progesterone will drive higher insulin resistance during this phase. So by the time you hit day number 21 or 22, your progesterone has risen super high and then it starts to drop. And in fact, the removal, the withdrawal of progesterone is actually what leads us to bleed and have a period. So progesterone's role is to maintain the lining of the uterus so it can accept that it can catch and grow that embryo, that fertilized, ovum. But it peaks around day 21 or 22 or 21 or 22, and then it starts to drop off. And by day 28, it drops so low that you can start your period. So over those 7 days, you're having a pretty significant swing of that progesterone. In general, I want you to, so if you found it in general that science bit was a lot, that's fine. Come back to me. I want you to hear the take home point. In general, in the days of your period and the week after your period, you really should see lower blood sugars. And then in the last 10 to 14 days of your cycle, 2 weeks prior to the start of your next period, you're probably going to see higher blood sugars. That's really the take home here. So complicating the cycle is the way that we feel, like our experience. This, if you, again, like there's this hormonal shit show that happens when we ovulate. You have all these different spikes and like all these different hormones, and I mean, like, of course, there's going to be a experience by you as a human being, emotional, maybe physical and feeling fatigue, maybe some nausea, maybe some lower abdominal pain, all sorts of things happen. Complicating what's going on with our blood sugars is also the way that we feel in these cycles. So sometimes women experience significant like drive, like go get itness in the early part of our cycle. So day 1 through day 14, 15, maybe 16, 17, 18, there's a lot of drive. And then, of course, in that part where the progesterone is climbing and then drops off, those couple weeks, 10 days before our period, most women find that there's lethargy and there's, of course, that there's cravings for certain foods, chips, ice cream, chocolates. All of these things are happening in that later half of our cycle. So the combination of what our hormones are doing to our blood sugars with what our body is experiencing in the form of fatigue and junk food cravings really can significantly impact your blood sugars every single month. So, what do you do about this? First, before we dive into this, I do want you to hear me as I tell you that every woman is different. You may not experience your cycle this way at all. You may see better blood sugars in the last half of your cycle than in the first half of your cycle. You may not experience cravings in the last half, but you find that the food management is harder in the first half. You may have a different experience, and that's fine. More than fitting your experience into the description that I just gave, it may be more helpful for you to just understand what your experience is and plan for that. So, recognizing cravings are a combination not only of our drive in our body. So maybe we're hungry. That's a feeling that comes in our tummy and as our brain interprets. Maybe we really don't have food in our belly and it's time to eat. And our belly is telling our brain, hey, it's time, let's go get some food. That is a biological experience, but our brain's saying, yes, it's time, Twinkies, let's go get Twinkies. They're my favorite. Or your brain saying, let's eat more, more, more. That is something that's coming in your brain. And there is the interplay between those two things. And cravings really can be both. And recognizing that cravings are combinations of our hormones and also our ability to manage stress, like hormonal stressors. Women, again, frequently will feel driven and overall really good in the time period before ovulation. But you may perceive that as having the munchies or wanting to be out and social with your friends and having different foods available to you. So you struggle harder with the food choices then. The medical literature will also tell you that some women don't see changes in their blood sugars or the changes aren't significant with their hormonal fluxes for them to notice. So nothing is wrong here, but really knowing what your pattern of your cycle is, that's where you can start to make a functional plan so that you can start to get ahead of this and improve your blood sugars long term. The way that you prepare for your cycle is really the key to your success. So that brings me to, what do you do about the changes that you see in your cycle? That is one of the questions Emily asked, like, how do you sync your cycle, right? I think Aviva Ram goes into that a lot better than I'm going to here. And that's why I made that suggestion on that book, Hormone Intelligence. But I do think that there are some basic, straightforward strategies for you to do to manage this part of your cycle. Remember, like, there's a saying that talks about luck favors the well prepared. This is where plans come in. It's very easy to feel under, some kind of external control with our hormones, right? Like there's something happening and I don't know what the hell is happening and it's going on and I just show up and this is what's happening. I had no control over it. And yeah, on some level, we don't have any control over it. So you need to plan ahead of time, right? Because the well prepared doesn't have to deal with the bad luck. The well-prepared deal, creates their own good luck really here is what I'm trying to say with this. So I want you to clearly know your cycle. Look at what your blood sugars do in comparison to your cycle. Before you do that, though, I really want you to look at what your blood sugars are doing compared to your cravings and your food choices. I want you to start there because I don't care what your estrogen and progesterone is doing. I don't care which one's dominating. If you're eating ice cream and potato chips, your blood sugars are going to be high and it has nothing to do with the hormones. So first, check in with your cravings. Determine what patterns you're seeing there. And then look at your blood sugars in relationship to your cycle. Determine where you actually see higher blood sugars. And then lastly, I want you to really consider how you experience your cycle. When is your fatigue heaviest? When do you have headaches with your cycle? When are you feeling strong and active and vital? Borderline high. When are you feeling great in your cycle? Look at that data, those three pieces of data. When are you seeing cravings? When are you seeing high sugars? And when are you feeling good or bad during your cycle? And then use that knowledge to strategize a plan for you and your health. So using these strategies really brings back some of that control to you. So what do you do differently? This is the second part of Emily's question. What do you do differently based on your cycle? So if you know that you experience extreme fatigue and cravings in the last 7 to 10 days of your cycle, so day 18 through 28, and I was like that when I had periods, and even now I still have some cyclic hormonal experiences, or at least that's what I think it is. But when I had periods, I know the 7 days prior to my period starting, I was just exhausted. The evening would come and I was done. I was exhausted. I need to lay down. And I can remember this happening in high school. This has always been the way it was. If you know you experience extreme fatigue, extreme cravings in a certain part of your cycle, then plan for that. How do you want to live a healthy life, diabetic free life, when you're feeling tired and hungry? How do you want to do it? It may look like you sleep more. It may look like you take naps in the afternoon. It may look like you schedule less outings with your girlfriends so you can rest more. It may be that you're kinder and you do kinder, less draining workouts. Maybe it's a massage. Maybe it's more fruit. Hold the phone. Ladies, you know what I think. My friend, you do not get diabetic from one banana. Nobody got diabetes from their banana problem. That is not the issue. So maybe during those parts of your cycle, when you know you want to eat a pint of Ben and Jerry's, you plan more fruit. Maybe it's a square of chocolate every day. Maybe it's more peanut butter. Maybe it's baked potatoes. Maybe like I crave carbs. Cool. You probably do crave carbs. I wasn't there in the planning phase of our periods, and I don't like to speculate too much on, where I actually do like to speculate a lot on why our biology does what it does. But it certainly kind of makes sense that if you're growing life in your body, that your body will drive you to eat more. And that last half of your cycle is really driven to grow life. So maybe you do want to eat a potato. Maybe you do want to eat a little bit more carbs. It might be more carbs than typical, and that's okay. You may decide you want to utilize more workouts, maybe more intense workouts, if you're up to it, in order to improve those blood sugars. Maybe. And that's a fine idea. But remember, poor sleep and increased stress also will run your blood sugars up. In general, I would not recommend sacrificing sleep or adding stress just to improve those blood sugars in that last part of your cycle. So all of these things may be things that you need to plan on doing when you know you're in that fatigued, high craving part of your cycle. That being said, if you see that your pattern is day 1 through 15, you feel fabulous, you feel great, It's time to gain some momentum. Use that time to gain some ground. That may be a time that you do stronger, more intense workouts. Maybe you do long runs. Maybe it's a time where you're like, those 15 days, I'm cutting sugar and flour during that entire time. I'm just doing it. It's easier. I'm just doing it. How do you want to use this knowledge about your cycle to bring you closer to your goals? What I want to offer you is during your cycle and knowing that you're going to have a time where there's a lot of fatigue and a lot of cravings, that is not the time to throw in the towel. Just because you know you're going to have high cravings, super fatigue, and that progesterone is going to run your blood sugars high anyway, is not the time to be like, F it, I'm going to have chips and Ben and Jerry's. You know your sugars are going to be stubborn and you know you're going to feel badly. That is not the time to not have any plan here. That's going to give you a big setback. And this is frequently this cycle of like having a couple good weeks and then a bad week, and then a couple good weeks and a bad week. But the bad week is so bad that it increases our insulin resistance to a point that we have type 2 diabetes. Women see that. That's probably a huge player in women developing type 2 diabetes. So don't throw in the towel. Have a plan. Decide what you're going to do, how you're going to live healthy when you're having this part of your cycle where it's harder. So that's all I have today. I want you to remember, expect better blood sugars during your period and the first week after it. Expect worse blood sugars in the 2 weeks prior to starting your next period. Learn how your patterns of fatigue and cravings work, and then plan how you're going to manage those things. Bada boom, bada bing. It can be that simple, even though maybe it's not always that easy. I'll be back next week. Until then, keep listening, keep avoiding foods that are making you sick, and keep making choices for your health, your longevity, and your vitality.